Welcome back to my channel. James Sprinkles here, and today we have Spencer from the Drunken Geek podcast, and he's going to be talking to us today about Pathfinder 2nd Edition. So let's give him a warm welcome. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Oh, well, as you said, I'm Spencer. Wow, I don't know how, I didn't expect that question. I was going to just dive into it. Sorry.
No, you're right.
Wow, this is going to be a terrible video. I hope you edit them.
I do, don't worry.
Oh, good. Well, I'm from Boston, Massachusetts. I'm a data analyst by day, and by night I make the Drunken Geek and host pub quizzes. It's I've been playing for almost 30 years now.
Oh, nice.
I've been playing D&D and Pathfinder and various RPGs since I was about 10 years old.
Yeah, so I've been playing D&D for about 5 years, and then this year I made the change from D&D 5th edition to Cyber System, and then obviously I've started reading Pathfinder, and that's why we're having this interview today.
Yeah, I mean, I also love Cyber System, and I'm a big Powered by the Apocalypse fan, Monster of the Week, and so forth.
Yeah, I did look at Power Apocalypse, but didn't quite draw me the same as Cypher. Let's start with the first question here. We got is why did you start playing Pathfinder? Why did you do Pathfinder in your podcast over D&D 5e?
Well, okay, so that question is understandable, but there's a premise underlying it that I want to push back on a little. While D&D and 5th edition is certainly by far the most common RPG, it's the most common on actual play podcasts. I don't know that it's fair to say that anyone opting to play a game that's not 5th edition is choosing it instead of 5th edition or over D&D, as that really sets up D&D as the default, and anyone choosing to play another game is making a conscious choice not to play it, but to play another game instead. That being said, when we started preparation for the Drunken Geek, late last year, we opted to play D&D for a number of reasons. It was in May when we became aware of certain allegations against a major creative executive at Wizards of the Coast, and we were no longer comfortable playing their product. So we decided to scrap our then underway campaign. We delayed our launch by about 6 weeks to switch systems and start a new game. At that point, we chose Pathfinder because it was similar enough to what the players in our game were used to. I was the only one at that time who had a real deep familiarity with Pathfinder or Pathfinder 2nd Edition. So we thought we could then get a new set of recordings relatively quickly. And also because Paizo, the publisher, has been trying, and mostly with success, to include the kind of diversity and representation that we want to see in the games that we support.
Exactly. No, that's something that I have noticed reading through the book. It does try to be that have that representation, which I really appreciate.
Certainly,
for sure. Yeah, and to be honest, one of the reasons why that I have been trying to keep up with your podcast is it isn't just another Dungeons and Dragon 5th edition one. It is something different, and I actually really like that because there is so many 5th edition podcasts, actual play podcasts out there. So it's nice to have something a bit different there.
You're not wrong.
Yeah. Sorry, lost my script here. Here we go.
That's fine.
So how do you find the critical going from 5e to Pathfinder? So obviously it's 10 above the DC is a critical success and 10 below the DC is a critical failure. Does that crit too often or not enough? Or how do you find that when you're actually playing the game?
Okay, so I really enjoy that, first of all, when I'm playing the game. But sorry, I figured out my answer to this based on a part of it that you didn't ask about adding it to your other games. I like it. I don't think it crits too often. One thing that a lot of people have said a lot when looking at Pathfinder 2nd Edition is, whoa, that's a lot of hit points. Like, let's compare. I'll try to keep it as much of an apples-to-apples comparison as I can. In one of my Pathfinder games, the party is coming up on a 13th level encounter with a dragon. So for comparison purposes, like I looked at a challenge level 13 dragon from D&D and this creature that they're coming up on.
Mhm.
The D&D dragon at this point has 200 hit points and an armor class of 18. The Pathfinder dragon has almost 300 hit points and an armor class of 34.
Yeah.
The D&D dragon hits with a plus 11. The Pathfinder dragon hits with a plus 25 to 27.
Yeah.
The DC to cut the damage on the D&D dragon is a 19. In Pathfinder, it's a 33.
Mhm.
What I'm kind of getting at is that the math in Pathfinder is incredibly closely tuned to the encounter level, to the modifiers that you get. Anecdotally, I can tell you that the people at my table are critting 99% of the time. It's on a natural 20. Because the people who are hitting 10 over the DC, be it on attack, skills, anything else, are the people who were built to be good at that thing.
Right,
and therefore they have an extra +2, +3 over everyone else. Everyone else is 99% of the time, they're only critting because they get a nat 20. And all of this is because the modifiers in Pathfinder 2 are so tightly, what's the word I'm looking for? Calibrated.
Yeah.
For party level and encounter difficulty. One of my players pointed out the other night that a single +2 can be a game changer for a PC in Pathfinder 2nd Edition.
Right. That's really interesting because, like, I definitely want to add something like this to my games, and even if you do crit too often, anyway, I'm not sure what you are like as a DM, but personally, if the party defeats my encounter too quickly or anything like that, that's just even more to celebrate. Like, that's just a great moment. And if you do crit, the whole table just like starts clapping, like, you know, you get that moment where everyone starts, yeah, and it's great.
Absolutely. I would be very careful with adding it to games where it's not already baked into the numbers a little bit.
True.
Because I have found, yes, on the one hand, everybody celebrates and they got right through it. On the other hand, I had a Pathfinder encounter where they crit with both a hit roll and I had something the other night where a player both crit with an attack roll and with the critical failure on the save against a disintegration effect. And they took out not the final boss of the module, but the one right below them.
Yeah.
They were at that point 10th level, and they did something on the order of 270 damage in a single shot. It was obscene. And I'm like, well, this session's going to end about half an hour early.
Yeah.
I was not prepared for that to happen.
But that happens with no matter what game you're playing. And, like, I know I've run D&D sessions. Like, and just, you know, someone crits 2 times in a row and your big bad beholder is dead before, like, someone gets a turn. And you're like, okay, well, that's done quickly.
Oh, absolutely. I completely agree. And it is really cool when it happens. And frankly, it's the kind of moments people talk about for years after a game is done.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I really enjoy how it works out in Pathfinder. I haven't tried it in D&D for combat. I have always, and some of this is supported by rules, in various D&D games, I've treated degree of success as opposed to success and failure as a spectrum based on how much they hit by or miss by. So, it's definitely a good rule.
Yeah, I pretty much do the same. Like, you know, if someone's trying to jump over the ledge and they just beat it by the DC, then I might say that they, like, kind of scramble up the edge, or if they... you know, they crit or they get massively over the DC to jump over, then they, like, you know, they might do a flip or something cool trying to do it, or something like, some extra flavor. Yeah, so for sure. And one thing I didn't have a chance to read into deeper is actually the multi-classing in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. So far as I could see, is you kind of just get to pick some feats from one of the other classes. Is that kind of how it works, or?
It's a little bit, it's not quite you're picking feats from other classes. So multi-classing in Pathfinder 2nd Edition is handled via what's called archetype feats. In fact, there's an optional rule introduced in the Game Mastery Guide, which either came out earlier this year or late last year, I think earlier this year, that give PCs a free archetype feat at every even level, and I actually use that optional rule at my tables.
Nice.
It's simpler, it's more versatile. Every archetype, which can be either a multi-class archetype, like the rogue multi-class feats, or something more specific like medic or acrobat or beastmaster. Each one of them is actually a chain of feats. And once you start a given chain, you can't start another one until you've taken a certain number of feats from the archetype you've already started. And for the multi-classing, each one gives you a facet of the class, but usually at a lower power level than if you were just a member of that class, which honestly I like, because it sort of protects the shtick of another PC. You're not horning in on, well, this is the person who's good at traps, and now suddenly you're just as good at traps, and the thing that they've dumped all of these points into is no longer, that's not their thing anymore. In fact, let's take that example, the rogue multi-class feats. The first one you take gives you training in light armor, it gives you training in stealth or thievery, and it gives you a class ability called Surprise Attack, which is basically it makes people flat-footed to you before they have acted in the first round of combat. It's a little more complicated than that, but that's the high level. Then, so you take that at second level. Then at fourth level, you can take another archetype feat from the rogue archetype, and you've got one that gives you either a first or second level rogue class feat, or you can take a feat that gives you a slightly weaker sneak attack than you would get if you were just a full rogue. And it goes on from there. But you're never going to be as good as a rogue at roguing.
Yeah, and that's how it should be. So that sounds actually really good and really versatile there. So that's good.
It is. I love it.
Because honestly, I just think that multi-classing is a big disadvantage in 5th edition. I think you just disadvantage yourself, and it feels very like you almost get penalized for it. So, which is a bit sad, because I like the kind of idea to mix and match, and I think that's just where Pathfinder really shines, in my opinion, is just the character creation and mixing and matching that you can do anyway. So, just really brings that to life.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, for sure. And that's another thing I actually really love about Pathfinder is the action economy is so much more simpler. Now, I'm not sure if you saw my most recent video, but I did mention this briefly, that just having 3 actions in the second, because you guys played 2nd edition of Pathfinder where you get just 3 actions, you can do whatever you like. None of this bonus action, and you want to try and do 2 bonus actions, you can't do that and move. And yeah, it's just so much easier. And trying to describe that to new players is something that was super annoying in D&D 5th edition, because you're trying to like go, yeah, you've actually already done your bonus action, so you actually can't do that this round. And you're like, but I didn't move or I didn't act. Can't I just make, no, it doesn't work that way.
Nah, sorry. Yeah, no, I love the action economy in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. I really like how it forces some interesting decisions. Like, some things take 2 actions to do. Some abilities let you do 2 specific things as a single action. Like, there's a rogue ability which lets you, or a rogue class feat that lets you step and strike with 1 action.
Oh, wow.
Some spells have increased effects the more actions you take to cast them. Heals, magic missile throws more missiles if you use a 1 action, a 2 action, or a 3 action.
Yeah.
Attacks become less accurate as you use more of them in a round, which has always been true, but now you can start trying at first level to get that nat 20 on a 3rd attack that just might hit.
Yeah.
Some abilities have to be your first attack in a round. Some abilities have to be your last attack in a round. I really like how the way you can mix and match actions within that 3-action framework really makes for some interesting tactical decisions.
Yeah, I think that's just that's just from what I can see is Pathfinder is just got that tactical crunch to it that 5e lacks there. But yeah, I think it's just really good that you can have that. And the multi-action thing is super interesting because I love that resource management. So that's exactly what you're doing. Like, do I want to do a 3-action spell or do I want to do a 2-action one or like ability or whatever? And I think that's really fun. So I think that's really cool that they've done that.
Yeah. I personally try to expand it into sort of other non-combat situations. Like I will set up a 3-action type of economy in, for example, social combat situations.
Mm-hmm.
It plays out over more than 6 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
So I try to take that and expand it into other subsystems to keep it consistent, and I find that it works really well.
Yeah, for sure. I think, yeah, because you could probably really easily just do that in 5th edition pretty easily to have that reaction. You'd have to maybe tweak some of the abilities, but you could do some other stuff like that similar. Yeah.
Yeah, you'd have to.
For sure. Also, it took me so much to understand this. I had to read over the section like 3 times. Is the dying and wounding conditions in Pathfinder, and I was like, this just seems really complicated. But then the more I actually got to thinking, the more I thought about it, I actually really love this as well. Is because I have players that go up and down, up and down, up and down, and that should really slow them down. And yeah, like you would like in real life, you'd be like have a concussion or something like.
Well, there's a couple different things to that. One, and this is something that has not yet shown up in the Drunken Geek because a bit of inside baseball. We are currently about 3 months back session-wise to where we're releasing. The episode we released last Monday was recorded on June 27th.
Oh, right.
And it was released on August 31st. So I get about 2 months.
Mm.
But I have moved in a direction since then where I'm really trying to not treat hit points as meat points. Like there will be something that is described as a hit, and I will describe it in game as it rattling off their shield. I'm treating it more like stamina and ability to keep fighting. And so that ameliorates some of that a little bit. However, also, I love dying and wounding. It does read super complicated, but once you get into it in game, it becomes the simplest thing ever. It's so much easier to illustrate it by playing through an example of it than reading it in the book.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I had to look it up on YouTube to be like, so how does this work? And I actually watch a playthrough of someone going through that process. I'm like, oh, okay, that actually makes a lot more sense. Yeah.
And honestly, it feels like there's more at stake somehow with the fact that wounded makes you more likely to die if you go down again. Things like that. Like it adds to the dramatic tension, which is really what I'm looking for in combat.
Yeah, for sure. You want that dramatic tension where you have that. Yeah, exactly. You want that dramatic tension, and that's just everywhere in Pathfinder. Even like the resting is different as well, and because the amount of times in 5e they go to sleep and they get all their hit points back, or they have a short rest, and even that's only an hour, and that you try and interrupt them, but even then you still get a lot of hit points on a rest. Where in Pathfinder it takes a bit more to heal that, from what I've read.
Yeah, I think it's like level times Constitution modifier you get back with a short rest. Pathfinder has a lot more magical healing, and in fact, the way the medicine skill works, it takes a lot of people getting used to let me rephrase that. It takes a lot of people quite a bit of getting used to when you're moving from Pathfinder 1 or any edition of D&D into Pathfinder 2 into using the medicine check for first aid.
Yeah.
Because it really heals a significant amount of hit points, which it hasn't in previous editions.
Right, okay. Cool. Yeah.
In previous editions, you could use like the heal skill to get someone stable, but it legitimately does more healing than like a base level heal spell in many cases.
Yeah,
In Pathfinder 2nd, yeah.
I really like that though, because I obviously moved my group from 5th edition to Cypher, and in that you get 4 recovery rolls a day, which is a D6 plus your tier, which is like your level. And the thing is after they go through a big combat, usually they're like, I'm going to have a downtime day today because I don't want to get involved in combat because it can take 2 days to recover their hit points, which is really fun and deadly. But trying to get my players to use the medicine check, because that can give you a good like 5 hit points if you roll well, it's really hard to get them used to doing that because they're just not used to it from 5th edition, and that's quite a lot of hit points. 5 is a lot in Cypher. So yeah, it's interesting to try and get that different mentality from systems. And I imagine because did your players go from 5e to Pathfinder or?
Most of my players went from 5e to Pathfinder.
Mm-hmm.
We have I have 4 different Pathfinder groups that I'm running right now. One of them being the Drunken Geek. The others not being podcast. I have one group that moved from Pathfinder 1 to Pathfinder 2, which is essentially moving from D&D 3.5 to Pathfinder 2, because Pathfinder 1 was D&D 3.75.
Yeah.
Of the players in the Drunken Geek, we have one player who had never played a game of anything before we started. So we have one player in the Drunken Geek who has never played a game before this. They started with 5th edition when we first started recording the Drunken Geek, and then within a month or two, we had switched over to Pathfinder 2.
Mm-hmm.
The rest of that group is primarily familiar with the rest of that group is primarily familiar with 5th edition. I, as the GM of the group, was actually the only one going into it who had any sort of deep knowledge of Pathfinder 2.
Right. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, so that's interesting though, because I thought it might be a bit difficult to pick up, but they've picked it up quite well by the sound of things then, so that's good to hear.
It's really not. It's simple enough. Honestly, a harder transition for me was going from having been running Pathfinder 2 with various groups for, at that point, 6 months. I just learned 5th edition when we started the Drunken Geek, when we were playing that. I had never played a game of it before. I went straight from D&D 3.5 into Pathfinder 1 into Pathfinder 2. And that was, I think, more difficult than the transition from 5th edition to Pathfinder 2.
Wow. Well, that's interesting to know. Yeah. Well, because I obviously started.
It's also a lot more difficult or a lot more different, I think, as the GM side rather than the player side.
Of course, yeah.
Like the differences are starker in the rules adjudication than they are in what the players are doing.
True. I suppose everything's really like spelled out quite well in the book, so I suppose it's probably more falls onto the GM then, would you say?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Where was that up to? Oh, yes. Now we'll move on to my next question here, which is penalties and bonuses. So obviously in D&D, you've got advantage and disadvantages. Then you have penalties and bonuses. So obviously one of the penalties I did notice in Pathfinder was if you're shooting beyond your range, it's -2 each range increment beyond your range. Is that how you would explain that?
I believe so. Honestly, most of the people I'm playing with aren't playing ranged fighters, or they're shooting from just outside melee, so I haven't had to use the range increments very often.
Right. Yeah, that was a bit odd one to get my head around. I find it. I understand it, but trying to explain that's quite difficult. But where do you add bonuses? Do you add bonuses to in like similar situation? Like, would you do you get a bonus if you stealth up on somebody, or how does that work?
Well, so there are bonuses which are built into the game. For example, if you are hidden, people to whom you are hidden are flat-footed against your attacks, and they get a. I don't remember if it's phrased as a -2 to their AC for being flat-footed, or you get a +2 to hit them. But either way, it's a 2 swing. And those are baked into the game. Then there's circumstance bonuses, which are really, I think, what you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah.
And those are, again, based on what I was saying earlier about the math in second edition being so very tightly calibrated. The standard is a +1 or a -1 for a minor or significant minor but significant advantage or disadvantage. Rarely a +2 or a -2 if you have something that gives you a major one. And in fact, the scale goes up to +4, and that is called out as, quote, overwhelming advantage or almost but not quite impossible. So I actually like that. Advantage and disadvantage is a very different type of math than a bonus or a penalty. In fact, the effective bonus on advantage is different based on what number you're trying to beat on the die. If you succeed, if you're rolling a die and you would succeed on an 8 to a 4, on an 8 up through a 14 would be the number that on the die would match the DC after your bonuses. The bonus from rolling advantage is equivalent to about a +5.
Yeah.
And that's the peak of it, and the equivalent bonus drops as you then go down to, you would hit on a 1 or better, or you would only hit on a 20. And circumstance bonuses that are not as swingy, to me, that's a good thing. I like people who have made the choices and expended their resources like feats and character options to be good at something. I like for them to have a consistent chance of success. Also, it's worth noting that with the hero points rule in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, you can get the equivalent of advantage on a roll if you spend the point in advance. Hero points are they're another mechanic that I love in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, because you get these chips or points if you're not playing at the table, and you can spend one and just roll twice and take the higher, or if you've already rolled, spend it and re-roll and use the second one. And so, I like that. I've actually expanded it a little bit at my table, that you could also spend one to give an opponent disadvantage on a save that you force them to make.
That's nice. It's a really good idea. I guess it's kind of like inspiration in 5th edition, I suppose. It's kind of similar
very much
idea.
so.
Yeah. No, I like that. I like that idea. Sorry to bring it back to Cypher System. I'm just going to do that quickly here. Is that with the XP system, I'm not sure if you've read of that, but you get XP, which is like 4 to start leveling up, but you can use that like a same thing, like you can use it to reroll, or you can use it to get a temporary small like skill at this. So you might, I can climb this mountain if I spend two points of like XP. And I really like that idea where you've got that, like, as long as and I always make my players come up with a good reason for it because it's XP. But like, I really like that idea that you can have that spend, like that dice roll was really bad, and I really want to re-roll that because, you know, for story wise, of course, yeah.
Yeah, I really like that. I am not super familiar with Cypher. I prepped to play a game of The Strange several years ago, but it never got off the ground, and the information has basically all fallen out of my head.
Fair. That's fair. I'll be honest, one of my players asked me to run a game of 5e for him, and I haven't, because all my groups have all just fell in love with the Cypher system. Like, oh god, I got no idea how to do this anymore. So I had to read up on it, even before this interview as well. I had to read up on it because I was like, I don't even remember how this works. Yeah. Yeah, just on those bonuses, you said one of the examples is you're stealthing, and that leads on to my next point, is that you can use stealth or even deception on initiative rolls, which is really intriguing, and I'm just wondering how that works exactly.
It works quite well, and perception is what you mostly get, and that makes sense from a story point of view. You're rolling initiative because you're seeing, do you detect that this person is about to attack?
Yeah.
But in various games over the past year since Pathfinder 2 came out, I've had stealth rolled almost as often by one PC who is always sneaking into combat.
Mm-hmm.
Deception gets less use, but I expect it to show up quite a bit more as the Drunken Geek goes on, since we have a swashbuckler who benefits from using Deception for Initiative. If
Mm-hmm.
he uses Deception for Initiative, he gets Panache to start the combat. But
Oh,
really,
nice.
you can use anything. I've used Society or Diplomacy for social combat, Arcana for Initiative against magical traps. I
Mm.
had an instance where a sorcerer was checking out some runes on a wall, and it turned out to be a trap, and I let them use their Arcana as initiative in order to recognize it and get out of the way.
Mm. Mm.
It really, it's really what makes sense for what the PCs and the enemies are doing at the time initiative is called for.
Mm-hmm. That actually really makes sense, and I did mention this in my most recent video, where if someone is really like charismatic, like you could be really quick-tongued, and then so instead of being quick-footed to jump into battle, it's more like you're really persuasive. So I really like that idea where you could, like the bard, like the classic bard, could be like, well, hang on a minute, and they could possibly use persuasion if it was a social encounter that was about to go into combat. You could do it that way as well, I think, and I think that's really fun.
I agree.
I think that's the thing is I think because Cypher is really simple. That's what I play a lot now, and it's really like very story focused, and that's really fun. And then Pathfinder seems the rules are very set, and it's got that in depth there. So for when that combat comes out, you can get really tactical with it. And I think D&D tries to sit in the 5th edition, sorry, I should say 5th edition, tries to sit in the middle where it's trying to do everything. And I think that's where, and that's probably why it's the biggest, it's the top selling, is because everyone knows it, it's got really good marketing, and it appeals to a huge audience, where I think Pathfinder probably is more for that more tactical and...
I would disagree.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, I think D&D is the best selling because it has been the best selling for a large number of years right now.
Mm-hmm.
And it is the one that everyone knows. I mean, hell, you can buy it at Target.
Mm.
But that probably made more sense to anyone watching in the US than your Australian fans.
Mm.
Now, but I wouldn't say that Pathfinder 2nd Edition is any more or less combat focused than 5th Edition. The addition of exploration mode in Pathfinder makes for a number of interesting options when out of combat, for one thing. I think that there's a high page count devoted to combat, simply because it's the part of the game that requires the most specific, consistent rules adjudication. There are a lot of rules around it because it's a tactical RPG once you're in combat mode. But that's not to say that other parts of the game are less important or should be less of a focus. Hell, I regularly have entire sessions that go by without initiative being rolled once. It's all about the group in question.
That's true.
It's also, for the record, why I use milestone advancement in all of my games. I have not tracked XP in, I'm going to say, 7 or 8 years in a game. I do the when the story advances and you have done, when you clear a chapter of the story, you level up, is essentially what I've been doing. And I'd rather that they grow in pace with the story than in pace with how much of a pack of murder hobos they've been.
Yeah. You're right. That's something is that I do like to do the milestone as well. Otherwise, you are rewarding that murder hoboism, and that's a problem to me. I know some people, they love that, and that's fine. But to me, that is, yeah.
Some people love it. It's not the game I'm interested in playing.
No. To me, if I want to just go down, knock down doors, go through a dungeon, kill as many monsters as possible, I'd play something like I play a computer game that we just go through a dungeon and kill things. That's
I was gonna say I'd play Munchkin. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah. Anyway, sorry. Please continue.
No, you're right. I'm going to skip my next question. I'm going to go on to, just because we're talking about combat and RP, and it's a pretty stupid question. I'm going to ask it anyway. So we did say that it seems a little bit more combat focused, and you've just basically disputed that, and I think that's a very fair point. But how does it hold up in RP?
How does it hold up in RP? It holds up really well, but then again, RP is not necessarily something that requires a lot of rules to adjudicate. So how the system holds up, it's not system based. It's about the players.
Exactly.
I don't think you can have a game which is 100% like combat rules, and the GM and players can still have a conversation in character and have it work out really well and change the story.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that's what RP is all about. What I really like about Pathfinder in terms of RP is a lot of the character creation process, which lends itself heavily toward figuring out who your character is, where they come from, and what they want.
Yeah, I did look at the character creation process, and I literally like fell in love and wanted to start making characters straight away, and just all that helps you build that backstory, and I did really like that. But you are right. It is a silly question because RP is something that doesn't really require rules. Is the RP is kind of just like when we're like 5 years old playing pretend. Like it's something
exactly. RP doesn't come from the game. RP is exactly what you just said. I can't improve upon it. Moving on.
What was your biggest challenge in going from D&D to, or what's just your biggest challenge running Pathfinder 2nd edition? That's probably the better way to phrase that.
Well, I wouldn't say that they're... So, I'm sorry, I'm trying to phrase my answer here.
No, you're right.
I think the biggest challenge is that there are fewer tools out there for Pathfinder 2 than there are for other games right now. We don't have a D&D Beyond, but as various virtual tabletops add more Pathfinder 2 support, I personally use both Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds for different groups, and let me tell you, my wallet hates me for it. It's gotten a lot easier. The one thing that's still tough going is encounter building. Mm-hmm. There aren't a lot of great tools out there for that yet, so you end up doing quite a bit of math in advance when you're doing homebrew adventures to balance the encounters and get the right number of monsters for this level at this challenge level. And there's a bit of figuring that out that there aren't any really great tools out there for yet.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I can't wait for there to be. It'll make my life so much easier.
I mean, but the same with 5th edition, I found that really, really super hard to build encounters anyway. And even like there is a lot out there for D&D 5th edition, but even stuff like Kobold Fight Club, I'm not sure if you've ever looked at that, but even that, like I use that for my party, and one encounter they absolutely trounced, and it wasn't even difficult for them. And another one, which should have been like easy encounter, they absolutely got wrecked just because of like the way that they interacted with the encounter. And I just think that encounter building is, no matter what system you have, it is going to be a tricky thing, and I guess more tools the better. But yeah,
you're right. I think more the tools for setting the baseline of this is supposed to be a challenging encounter at this level. Like D&D Beyond has an encounter builder. We don't have that for Pathfinder yet, but I'm sure that there will be very soon. There was an amazing tool for Pathfinder 1st edition called Combat Manager, which I believe the person making that is currently working on a Pathfinder 2 one. And I cannot wait for that because it was the #1 tool I used in my 1st edition Pathfinder games. But you are correct. Encounter building it's where a lot of the art of running games lies, because it's setting up something which will be challenging for your players. I have run encounters because I run a lot of pre-written modules. I have run encounters for different groups, the same encounter, that because of the group's approaches to the game went completely differently, and you'd have one group just waltz through it and one group get completely trounced.
Yeah,
And yeah.
Cause I did a lot of because that's how I started doing fifth edition. Is I went to the store and started doing Adventurers League, which is like the organized play, and same thing. You run an adventure for one group, and they'd like breeze through it, and another group wouldn't, and they were the same encounter, maybe some slight changes depending on how many people at the table, but yeah, it was always something that was odd. Yeah, for sure. I have to say that there does seem to be a lot of maths and management behind the screen compared to some of the other systems I've read, and I'm not sure if that just seems that way or it just really kind of comes naturally when you're actually running it. But does it seem to be more effort on your mind to run a game?
It doesn't. Although I'll be completely honest with you, that may be because I have been using tools like Fantasy Grounds and Roll20, which make it much easier to do all of the math and to find the numbers that you need and to click on something and have it roll the dice that you need for this.
That's true. That's one of the benefits of like Roll20 is just having that where you click a button, it adds your proficiency modifier, it adds all this, it adds that, and it's just done. And I think that's awesome. So that's where those online tools really come in handy, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that there's any more or less math in running the game or numbers to just have in your head.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I think there's significantly fewer than you had in, say, Pathfinder First Edition or D&D 3.5.
For sure. Yeah. No, it seems like a good system, and it's definitely something I do want to try out. I will be just going to go off script here a little bit. I will be honest. My first time I ever was told about Pathfinder, I had a very bad experience. I'm not sure if you see this a lot in your community, where I had a Pathfinder player tell me, like, just give me the most shit there was possible about playing 5th edition, and he got all like high and mighty about playing Pathfinder 1st edition, and I just thought that was it put a bad taste. So I never looked back, and then the 2nd edition come out, and I thought I'd better at least have a look. So yeah, I don't know.
That's fair. So first of all, I have a particular dislike for anyone who tells somebody else that they're having fun wrong or enjoying something badly. That is not, in my view, a valid argument. I personally have issues with playing 5th edition. There are parts of it I don't like. And as I said, there are issues with the management at Wizards of the Coast that I have an issue with and don't particularly want to support them. That doesn't mean that I judge anyone else for doing so. It just means that I don't. There are. I don't know if you can bleep me out if you want to. There are assholes in every fandom.
Oh, there is. No, there always seems, yeah.
So I have run into that a few times in Pathfinder fandom. People will give people a hard time for playing other games, and I think that that's ridiculous. If someone likes a game, let them enjoy it. But I have a soft spot for Pathfinder.
Of course, and like you always do. And to be honest, I'm going to always have a soft spot for 5th edition, because if I never played 5th edition, I wouldn't have even known anything else about any of the other great TTRPGs that are out there, because it's the only one I ever knew. And that's that same what we were talking about earlier about how it's marketed, and it's the biggest one out there. And trying to explain to my mum, like, because she's always asking me what I'm playing, and I'm like trying to explain to her that I play something different. She's like, "What's that?" I'm like, "Oh, it's like D&D. Just like there's no point trying to like, it's because everyone know it. Like most people know what D&D is. So yeah.
Yeah, I admit I have less of a soft spot for 5th edition because it is the 4th edition of Dungeons and Dragons that I played.
Yeah, no, in fairness, yeah.
Sorry, 5th edition, 2nd, 3.5, 4th edition, and then 5th edition. Yeah. I played 5 editions of D&D. The only thing 5th edition has as an advantage over the others is that it was a vast improvement over 4th edition.
I hear that a lot, and like you've said you've been doing this for like 30 years. Did you say?
Almost. I'm going to be 39 in 3 weeks, and I started playing when I was 11.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I've only been playing like things for 5 years. So I'm a baby compared to how long you've been playing. So you've got a bit more about that. Do you use alignment? Like alignment,
What?
like do you use the like alignment
Oh,
system?
alignment.
Sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry. I don't know why I couldn't understand that. I use it? Yes. Am I a big fan of it? Yeah, not so much. Alignment for me, it's descriptive, not proscriptive. It's about a
Mm-hmm.
character's mindset. It helps describe where they are, and notably, it can change over time, and that may have
Mm-hmm.
consequences in game.
Mm-hmm.
Alignment is a useful tool for a player when making a decision of how your character will react to a new situation. It
Right.
doesn't lock them into one course of action. I guess, in short, alignment is for the player, not for the PC.
Okay, that's actually really interesting because personally, I've always been like a massive person into like RP, creating characters and world building, doing all that since I was like since I could remember. So I always looked at the alignment system as like very structured and very like I don't want to be locked in a box. But if you struggle to get into your character and you put yourself into alignment, that actually makes lots of sense. I've never actually thought of that way. No,
Yeah,
that's actually really good. Yeah. Sorry.
it's more of a guidepost for, yeah, exactly. When you're in a situation and you're not sure how to RP it, alignment is a good jumping off point of how would my character feel about this situation, this person, this action.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Um, and I know in fifth edition there's a few spells that matter depending on alignment. I'm not sure if it's the same in Pathfinder. There's probably a few
It
things
is.
there.
I tend to avoid those spells unless someone is a cleric, a paladin, or an outsider. Alignment is, I don't treat alignment as inherent, and
Mm,
therefore those spells just aren't as useful in my games, because unless someone has a particularly strong aura of good or law or chaos, I kind of put those to one side for people.
mm,
I really don't like the whole idea of inherent trait determinism stuff in D&D. It's one of the reasons why I was really pleased when Paizo moved away from race and into ancestry and background together, sort of
yeah.
forming where your character comes from. The addition of backgrounds is my favorite thing about Pathfinder 2.
Mm, mhm. Yeah, that was a big thing that I also another reason why I really started looking for other systems is because I just like having races that are inherently evil, like the whole orc situation, and you know the whole issue with Wizard of the Coast about that now, and um, lost my train of thought as well. Yeah, and just having those like those negatives to a character as well. I really dislike that, like the orc being always -2 to intelligence, and well, that's not too bad, but just the stereotype that always seems to get enforced is that orcs are dumb, and I really don't like having a race that is pigeonholed like that.
For me, it's not even orcs are dumb, it's orcs are savage. Fighter 2 has some issues with a little bit of that in terms of the description as well. They're not perfect at it, but I think they're better, and I'm glad that Wizard of the Coast is finally barely starting to catch up.
Yeah,
But yeah, the ancestry and the backgrounds and having them both inform who the character is and hit on ability scores and all of that is is a really important step that's been taken with this edition.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's it. Even like you said, they're not perfect, but they're taking the right steps, and D&D's taken way too well. Sorry, Wizards of the Coast have taken way too long to make those changes and make those steps. So it's an improvement
Yeah,
for sure.
I mean, honestly, look at who's working on the game. Paizo has a incredibly inclusive team. They've had LGBT representation in their world, not just with gay and lesbian characters, but also they have canon. They have had canon trans characters and non-binary characters for years. They've had canon NPCs with disabilities that aren't treated as somehow monstrous or other. and when they screw up, they listen to their community.
And that's the main thing, because people make mistakes, but you got to listen to your community, and that's something that it sounds like they're doing very well.
Yeah, Paizo has been really good about that for quite some time.
Yeah, awesome. All right, now we've got through all the heavy questions. Now we're going to move on to the fun ones. Are you a forever GM, or do you sometimes get to play?
In the 27 years I've been playing, I can think of fewer than half a dozen campaigns I've been a player in. I very rarely get a chance to play, but I love it when I do. I'm actually in the middle of a Monster of the Week game right now that's some of the most fun I've had gaming in years.
Nice, awesome. I'm pretty lucky that my partner, we met playing 5th edition, D&D 5th edition, and she really enjoyed the game, and then basically she wanted to have a go at running, so basically I got my 2 weekly games, one that I run and one that she runs, so it's actually, I get a good 50-50 split, so I'm pretty lucky there. All right, next question. Heavy prep, or do you do quick improv? Mostly improv, sorry.
Both.
Or would you prefer not to say?
No, I'm not a wing it GM. I prep both at a session level and at a campaign level, but I always have to bear in mind that no plan survives contact with players. They will make decisions you don't expect, and you'll have to improv anyway. This probably comes from my theater background, but my prep focuses heavily on NPCs, not statting them out so much as knowing who they are, what they want, and what they'll do to get it.
Mm-hmm.
Also, something I have worked very hard to learn and internalize, and I'm still not great at it, is understanding for myself that there's no shame in saying to my players, hey, that just went a direction I did not plan for. Let's take 5 minutes while I figure some stuff out.
Yeah, I've had to do that too sometimes. And I found it very tricky to do that. But yeah, sometimes you do have to do it because your players do crazy things. And when I first started playing, I had plenty of DMs like, you're doing what? Like, we just, you do that, especially for the really big, heavy role players. And yeah, for sure, it definitely does go in a direction. I think if you sorry,
go ahead. No,
please go ahead. I think if you really prep a environment, so if they're going to this town and you really work on what's happening in the town, who the big players are, and how the NPCs work, you don't necessarily have to plan much else because the environment is so alive that that, oh, well, they're going to do this, that's going to annoy that NPC, and everything else kind of just falls into place. So it's like the illusion of planning, if that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. The other thing, and this kind of touches on what you were saying about GMs are you're doing what? My least favorite thing in the world with gaming is GMs/DMs who view their role as adversarial to the players.
And
well, not even just GMs who they have planned a fight and you are going to get into that fight and you are going to get into it in the way that they have planned, and all other options will be not viable to your player.
Yes, that's a big problem. I've had a lot of DMs and GMs that do that, and it really upsets me. Yeah,
I am not a fan.
Not a fan at all.
But these are the fun questions. Moving on.
Yeah, of course. Do you prefer to play online or in person?
I never thought I'd say this, but I think online. Given that even when we could have in-person sessions, the Drunken Geek is made up of players in 3 different states. We also don't have much of an option.
Mm-hmm.
But for many of the reasons I mentioned earlier, with Roll20 and Final Fantasy Grounds having the tools to run the game more efficiently, I'm actually really liking going online.
Mm-hmm. I found the same because I've always played in person. So when lockdown hit and everyone had to be isolated, I went to online, and there was a lot of things that I could just do that was a lot easier to use those Roll20 and setting out a map for the players. Because I don't know about you, but when I'm in person, we always have so many snacks at the table, and I've got no room to put a bloody map. So it's just those little things.
My players have a tradition of pouring a beer on a character sheet at the start of every campaign. So one has been ruined. and we have sacrificed that character sheet to the god of snacks and beer.
Perfect. That's yeah. So I prefer in person personally, but obviously with everything that's going on, it's not really a big loss going online for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Next question: do you allow party conflict in player versus player in your games?
Party conflict, yes, to an extent, in that people can have problems with each other, but in the end, and I stress this to my players all the time. In fact, you'll hear me say it, and I think the second episode of The Drunken Geek, they are the good guys. And at the end of the day, the party has to work together and trust each other. Nothing against people who play in other ways. It's just not the type of story I'm interested in telling.
Yeah.
PvP, I very much steer away from, except in extreme circumstances, like if someone is dominated or controlled, or single shots of this person's about to get out of line and a single punch to either try to knock them out or whatever, in which case I won't run it as combat. I'll run it as an attack roll and a fortitude save to avoid getting knocked out.
Yeah. No, that's what I basically do as well. Yeah.
Also, the game just isn't balanced for players aren't balanced to fight each other.
No. I don't mind, like, if because I know sometimes I've got two players, and their characters never seem to get along. Like they get along enough to be like, we have to work together because we need to stop this threat, or we need to stop this whatever, this lich or whatever. But they always have a point where if they have a disagreement, that they always get into a fight. And then they like, okay, they don't, not to the death. It's just a quick fight. Like someone goes down, they heal the other one up, and like, okay, I won that argument, and then they move on, which I think is actually quite good about my players. But I have had a game where it just got really bad, and the players and the player and the characters just, they didn't want to work together, and I'm like, okay, well, you have to work together because you are the good guys, and it just, yeah, it was a big issue. So it's a very fine line. I think you have to be very careful with your players doing PvP.
Yeah, I tend to err on the side of not, but then again, I also tend to throw my players a number of NPCs to fight and not trust. So set it up as them versus the world, and at least that'll bring them together.
Yeah, exactly. All right, next one is: do you fudge rolls or do you prefer not to say?
So I was going to prefer not to say, but so there's an old apocryphal quote which says the only reason a DM should roll dice is because they like the sound that they make. I'm not quite that bad. I don't fudge rolls often, but if something would either completely derail the story or if something would make something more interesting and more exciting, I'm not above some fudging within the realm of what's realistic.
Yeah, of course. I'm the same, especially with brand new players and they're still kind of like learning the ropes. I find that if they do something really stupid because they haven't really worked out that they can't just run, they can't be a whiz and just run at the at a troll or something, it's not going to work very well for them, like in a really low level. I might like go, oh yeah, no, that misses, instead of critting them or something like that, just to or go, oh yeah, it hits and it's not a crit. Or sometimes I might, if I've made the mistake and I've gone, okay, I'm going to put this up to a roll and they fail it, and that ruins the story, that's my mistake, and I will let them say, okay, yep, that passed, even if the DC that I set was too high or something, because at the end of the day, the story comes first for me personally.
Yeah. See, my rule, I will never fudge a player's roll. If they hit a DC, I'm never going to make them miss a DC. But my rule for calling for rolls is I will only call for a roll if there's an interesting consequence of failure.
Yeah.
There's no fun in just saying no, and unless it's no, you need to find another avenue of investigation or another way into this.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's something, the example I always use for this is mystery games. there's no fun in not finding a clue.
Mm-hmm.
There's fun in not properly interpreting it, but there's no fun in not finding it. So I'm more likely to have them find something than just look at a room and not find anything if that's their only option to get that piece of information.
Yeah, I think that's a really common mistake, and that's something that I did a lot of when I first started DMing. Is I put like a check behind a roll, and I was like, oh, okay, now I've really like just hamstrung the story because they needed that clue to move on, and yeah, I've had to think of creative ways to bring it back, but it's a common mistake of first time GMs, I think. Okay, what have we got next? I think you answered this question briefly in one of the earlier ones, is do you prefer to have drinks at the table or stay sober?
I don't drink very much at all personally.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the players in the Drunken Geek drink some, and a lot of them do so during the game a little bit, but absolutely never enough to impact the game. That's why it's so special that we have a Patreon goal coming up, where if we hit it, we will be recording a one-shot of us with all of us very drunk.
That actually sounds a lot of fun. I was gonna say
there's a game called gonna be a one-shot of a game called Dr. Magnet Hands by Grant Howitt. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
No, I'm not. No.
Writes a lot of one-page RPGs. He wrote Honey Heist and Crash Pandas, which is a game about raccoons who are somehow driving a car. It's kind of hilarious. But Dr. Magnet Hands is his game that, as he put it, he has only ever played, tested, or designed, tested, or run while drunk.
That does sound like a lot of fun. I would be very disappointed if you didn't have any drinks being called the Drunken Geek, but
well, so the way that that name doesn't actually come from what we do. It comes from the company that we all worked for before this all happened. Everyone involved with the Drunken Geek, at least at this point, I don't know, we may have other people at some point in the future. We're all former quizmasters for a company called Geeks Who Drink Pub Quizzes.
Right.
And there was a group on Facebook for many years for gamers within that company called the Drunken Geek, home of the Nerd Adventurers Guild. And several of us, when we decided to start a podcast, we just picked that up.
This is really cool. I like it. You've got a good connection there, and a great team there. I really do enjoy listening to you guys. So
I'm so happy to hear that.
It's as much as there's so many podcasts up there, it's one of the very few that I do try and keep up with.
Oh, thank you. That means a lot.
You're welcome. Well deserved. Okay, RP or combat? What do you prefer?
Yes, one of those at any given time. Sometimes both of them together.
Yeah, that's a fair answer. I as a big role player, I always try to role play into combat as well, even if it annoys my GM. But yeah.
As a GM, I prefer role playing. As a player, I prefer combat because honestly, even though I was a theater major, improv is not my number one skill.
No, I get that. Yeah, I'm trying to improve my improv skills, but I lean on the side of RP, but I think combat is very important to any of these games. You can't just have all RP, otherwise the game really starts just to feel a little bit less impactful, I think.
Yeah.
Do you prefer to use original content or pre-written adventures?
Well, I've spent much of the last 6 years or so running pre-written adventure paths for either Pathfinder 1 and now Pathfinder 2. Mm-hmm. The Drunken Geek is about to finish the first pre-written arc, and we're spinning off into an original campaign story, and I'm super excited for it. This is one place where I'm so glad for the move to mostly online gaming, because it's so much easier to bring together all the various game elements that you need for an original game than it is when you're dealing with, okay, this monster is in this book, but is using a magic item from this book, and these spells are in these 3 different sources, and I need to combine them all on this Google Doc, or I will go crazy during the game.
Yeah, I do find that was something that I really struggled with at playing at the table, because I do a lot of original content, and I have a computer or a tablet, and I've got like 8 different Google Docs I have to like switch between, and it's a pain. It's a real pain.
Yeah, I'd have like 9 PDFs open in tabs, and I'd have to be switching back and forth like every time a NPC did something to pull whatever they're doing. So that is one reason that I'm so happy for things like Roll20, because I can pull them all together into a single NPC stat block and just run the game.
Yeah, I think Roll20 is really good for that. Like, or just any of those. Fantasy Grounds probably is much the same. I haven't actually looked at Fantasy Grounds.
Fantasy Grounds is much the same. Fantasy Grounds and Roll20 do different things. Fantasy Grounds has more of the actual mechanics incorporated into it, like the combat tracker, which is simultaneously an initiative tracker that displays all of the relevant stats you need, is much more strongly incorporated than in Roll20 in their initiative tracker. At the same time, Roll20 does, I think, maps and movement and things like dynamic line of sight and all of that much better than Fantasy Grounds.
Okay, that's really cool, because
although Fantasy Grounds is catching up with the release of their most recent release in the Unity engine, but yeah, they do different things very well. But both of them have the whole ability to create these creatures and pull in the stuff from different sources. So I use them both.
Yeah, fair enough. I do hear a lot with people. I do hear this every now and then, that people who use pre-written adventures aren't as good GMs, and it's stupid. It makes me mad as well. I won't go into. We're trying to say fun, but I had to just bring this up briefly. But I think that no matter what you do, whether you're using a pre-generated adventure, like a pre-written one, or you're doing your own, at the end of the day, it's still going to be yours, because you're going to add your own NPCs, you're doing your own twist to it. So it's really just as creative. And in a day where we're trying to like fit in games of, like, we're trying to run a game once or twice a week, depending on who you are, and if you have a full-time job, like, I get it, because like, I struggle to get all my planning done for my game once a week. And if it's just a pre-written adventure, it takes a lot of the legwork out of it for you. So I totally get the benefits of both.
Also, there's so much good adventure content out there.
Exactly.
Just even sticking with just Pathfinder, the Iron Gods adventure path, which was largely, I believe, inspired by, or at least heavily influenced by, the old Expedition to the Barrier Peaks classic D&D module for,
Oh, wow.
I forget if it was original D&D or first edition AD&D, but it was barbarians in a spaceship, essentially. And it's one of the best written adventure paths I have ever read or run. The War for the Crown adventure path was spectacular, and people are taking the time and energy to produce these things. I don't think it makes you a lesser GM to take what they've done and put it on your table, because that still takes work.
Oh, it does. You're right. It does. And honestly, like, the people that write those adventures are, most of them are, well, it depends on what ones you're looking at, are award-winning writers. So like, why not use their great skill? Because you're going to have fun running this crazy adventure that you could have thought up. I won't say you can't, but like, that this other person thought up. Like, it's just going to be as fun, and you can add your own flavor to it and change it and whatever you want. I think, yeah, you're right. There's just so much great content out there. You would be ashamed not to use it.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, this is one of the last questions we got now before we wrap up, is how do you organize your campaign notes?
These days, mostly Google Docs and Google Sheets. Also, a physical journal that I, when I'm sitting down and writing plot or brainstorming ideas that I will later transfer in. But I use OneNote. I'm 99% sure I still have an account on World Anvil if I ever decide to make a wiki for our version of Galarian, which I love the Pathfinder core setting. There are some great Pathfinder 2 settings that use homebrew, or Pathfinder 2 podcasts that use homebrew settings, but I just adore the core setting, and it's one of my other favorite things about the game. But that wasn't the question you asked. I have used all sorts of them, but these days it's mostly Google Drive.
Yeah, Google Drive is very good. I've tried a lot. I did try using World Anvil, and I felt that was a little bit clunky. It is good that you can share it with your players, but I found it very clunky to go through it all and try and there's a lot of effort to organize it. And then I went to Evernote, and then went back to Google Docs. And I think someone on Twitter recommended using Notion, so I am trialing Notion at the moment, which is pretty good. But I think you can't really beat Google Docs because you can just have many documents open at once, which is the benefit of that.
Yeah. Google Docs is great. We have a party planning or a party resources Google sheet with just all of the treasure that they found, because I'm also not a GM who tracks encumbrance or bulk.
Yeah.
Because that is not fun to me.
I mean, some people would argue that, but I agree. But I know some people love encumbrance and counting every single arrow that they have and all that, and that's just not fun for me, though.
Well, note, I said it's not fun to me. I didn't say it's not fun.
True.
See my previous comment on I hate people telling other people they're having fun wrong.
Exactly. Oh. All right, well, that's all my questions for you. If you don't have anything for me you want to ask, or...
No, I have really enjoyed this. Thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you so much for coming on. I've actually enjoyed it. It's just been like chatting to a good friend. If people did want to listen,
thanks, man.
If people did want to listen to your podcast, where would they go?
Well, they can find us pretty much anywhere you can get podcasts. So we are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Podchaser, and I'm sure others. Also at our website at thedrunkengeek.com, where you can listen to our episodes or link to those services that I just mentioned. We're on Twitter at Drunken Geek Pod, and we're also on Instagram under that same name. They can join our Discord server and chat with us, and the link to that is at the pinned post on our Twitter. Oh, and we also post bonus content, deleted scenes, etc., among other things, to our patrons at patreon.com/drunkengeekpod.
All right, well, I'll put all that in the description on my video once that's all uploaded, so they can check out those. I'll put the Discord link in there as well, so they can join us.
Fantastic.
Because then they can come and talk to both of us there. I'm in there, so...
Yes, you are. And I warn people, as you've, I'm sure, noticed, it's mostly about snacks. That is 99% of what we talk about.
I do enjoy the talk of snacks. I think it's very important. It's one of the core things, I think, of tabletop RPGs.
Oh yeah, you're not wrong.
All right, well, thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed this. I'm sure we'll catch up and talk soon. You have a lovely night.